So I've got 35 slides and 15 minutes, so probably you won't see a lot of the slides today. My presentation is on elephant communication, neuroscience, and trauma. I may not get to the trauma piece in as much depth as I would have liked. The question that I'm asking is, how can elephants and humans better communicate with each other? This is a question of my fieldwork. My fieldwork is qualitative, and you'll hear about that in the spring. What I want to talk to you about today is looking at it from a little bit more of a scientific perspective. Briefly, just to review what we know about human-animal parity from neuroscience, Jakob Pongzep has given us these 7 shared brain circuits, emotional brain circuits across all mammals: play, care, seeking, lust, rage, fear, and panic. And we also know that mammals are neurobiologically social beings, and as such, they're vulnerable to neurobiological trauma through disruption of early attachment and social systems. Some specific things about the way humans and elephants compare. Elephants live in complex social networks, teaching their children how to survive and interact with other elephants. Elephants recognize death, they mourn their lost loved ones, and they pause in remembrance over the bones of their ancestors. Elephants can remember and recognize over 100 individuals, humans and elephants. They can recognize each other, they can recognize humans that they've encountered in the past. Elephants have also passed the mirror test, indicating that they have a sense of self. So that's one of the ways that scientists try to measure if an animal has a sense of self. Can it interact with its reflection in a mirror as a reflection? Elephant brains. A recent study found that elephant brain has 257 billion neurons. This is actually 3 times as many neurons as humans. So, of course, it's not just about how many brain cells you have, it's also about the connectivity between the brain cells. That's not, I don't have any concrete data about that. But it does beg the question, could elephants be somehow more intelligent than humans since they have so many more brain cells? It's worth thinking about. Of course, this would be a different kind of intelligence. Elephants have no written language and they don't build nuclear bombs. But I also want to point out... I also want to point out that for most of human history, right, as the human organism, we lived in small hunter-gatherer tribes that did not have written language or advanced technology either. So just speaking in terms of the biological organism and leaving culture out of it, it's interesting to think about. So the elephant cerebral cortex is actually only 1/3 the size of the human cerebral cortex in terms of brain cells, number of brain cells. So that's still a pretty big neocortex, but it is significantly smaller than humans. So where are all of the extra neurons? Well, they actually turn out to be in the cerebellum. So what do we know about the cerebellum? We know in the human evolutionary line that it's crucial for motor control and motor learning. It coordinates and integrates information between the spinal cord and higher cortical processing. But recently there's been some more interesting information about the cerebellum that makes it a little more confusing. A study with deaf humans suggests that the cerebellum may play a role in nonverbal language processing, and further studies have suggested an unclear connection between the cerebellum and language coordination. So somehow the cerebellum does seem to be involved in language. The elephant cerebellum, as you can see, it's enormous, it's sticking out of the back there. It's the largest cerebellum in nature relative to brain size. There is evidence for higher complexity of interconnections within the cerebellum than in other species. It has unique neuronal features that are not found in any other animal with cerebellum, and this suggests that there are specialized cerebellar functions in elephants that we don't see elsewhere in nature. So these researchers speculated 2 possible reasons for this enormous cerebellum. One is that it's necessary for using the trunk. The other is that it's involved in infrasonic communication. So first I want to debunk the trunk hypothesis. Why would elephants need such a huge and complex cerebellum to operate their trunks? It is through the trunk is composed of over 100,000 muscle fibers and can be manipulated with expert precision, used like a human hand. Elephants can use tools. However, humans are capable of similar complex precision with their fingers, playing piano, for example. So my question is, are there any physiological grounds for requiring exponentially more brain power to use a trunk than a pair of hands? I feel like that would actually need to be demonstrated somehow. It doesn't make any sense to me. To further illustrate this, I'm going to talk about octopuses for a moment. Like elephants, octopuses have appendages capable of precise, prehensile movements. They can use tools, and they can even unscrew the lids of jars to get out of captivity or to get at food. So, octopuses variously are said to have between 130 and 500 million brain cells, whereas elephants, as we see, have 257 billion, which means that elephants basically have 257 billion more brain cells than an octopus. By the number, you could fit 514 octopus brains inside one elephant brain. Why do elephants need 257 billion neurons to do what an octopus can do with 500 million neurons? Okay, so I'm going to say a little bit about my hypothesis or my fantasy about the elephant cerebellum. There's a very early divergence between the human and the elephant's evolutionary lines. It's 100 million years. So in this time, I think it's not unreasonable to hypothesize that the elephant cerebellum would have developed in a really unique way. And what I would like to think is that because it's so much more complex and so much bigger, that it may function as a kind of second cortex for the elephant. What's exciting to me about this idea from a somatics perspective is that we can then imagine that elephants really think in an especially embodied way, that they think with somatosensory images. I can't prove that, it's just a hypothesis. But I find it exciting. So getting back to the other hypothesis put forward by the researchers, they thought that this enormous cerebellum might have something to do with infrasonic communication. So infrasonic communication, this is incredible. Elephants can send vibrations. We can't hear them with human ears. They can send vibrations down into the earth. The vibration travels through the earth. Other elephants pick them up and can decode the message. And this can happen over miles. So the reason they thought that the cerebellum might have something to do with this is that other animals that have relatively larger cerebellums also use echolocation, dolphins and bats. So I want to come back to the human cerebellum for just a moment. Insofar as humans communicate through gesture, the cerebellum is vital for communication. If we don't have fine motor skills, we can't gesture. Albert Mehrabian famously proposed that 55% of human communication is by gesture. And as I mentioned, fMRI studies of deaf humans reading sign language showed cerebellar activation, and another showed human cerebellar activation when predicting the outcome of sentences. So there is some sort of implication in human cerebellar function around language. So, could the cerebellum be a key to better communication with elephants? I think it's a rich avenue for further study to more closely compare these two structures in humans and elephants. How am I doing on time?
7 minutes.
Okay, great. So, just want to talk a little bit about elephant communication in general. Elephants communicate through at least 5 channels that we know of. The infrasonic vibration, which I've mentioned. Chemical communication. The interior of the elephant trunks have millions of olfactory receptors, ostensibly superior to a dog's sense of smell. Then we share with them communication through touch, communication through visual gesture, and auditory. They have a wide range of rumbles, trumpets, and calls. And you see this wonderful picture here. These elephants are putting their trunks in each other's mouth. That is actually a traditional greeting for elephants. And when they do that, it's a gesture, it's touch, and there's also speculation that there's chemical signaling going on with that as well. Sort of getting to taste where you've been. Okay, this is amazing. This elephant, it's been verified that this elephant actually speaks some words in Korean. Elephants can't, he only has a couple words, hello, no, good, and sit down. Elephants don't have our muscular lip structures. So the way he figured out how to do it was by sticking his trunk in his mouth and manipulating his mouth in such a way to create the phonemes. Which, just from the viewpoint of the kind of intelligence that would be required to create that imitation, it's absolutely extraordinary. There's a huge debate right now whether or not this guy actually understands what he's saying. I think he probably does to some extent. Other people are very opposed to the idea. Who knows, but it's pretty exciting to think about. I could go on about elephant trauma for quite some time. I guess I'm going to have to give you guys the brief version. You'll hear more about it in the spring from me. The 4 types of elephant trauma that there's a lot of literature about are captivity and abuse in captivity, forced labor, it happens primarily in Asia, developmental trauma, separation from the family system, and PTSD, a traumatic event. And an individual elephant may suffer from all 4 types, particularly if they've been the victim of a cull or poachers. So they've witnessed their family get murdered, and then they don't have a social system, so they're not properly socialized. They have developmental trauma, and then they go into captivity. So I'm not going to explain what trauma is, because we all know in this room. A lot of elephant trauma has stemmed from culls, which are government-sanctioned killings of elephants for population control. The surviving children are often then taken captive and relocated. And this has long-term consequences. Elephant societies are quite complex. They have complex social networks. Various groups will meet and diverge over time. Children are raised by the tribe, first consisting of mothers and ala mothers. They teach basic survival skills and emotional regulation to their children. In their teenage years, the male elephants then leave the tribe between age like 10 and 15, 16, and they go and live with an all-male community, and they are further socialized into the male culture of the elephants. Male and female elephants, when naturally socialized within their own culture, are largely non-violent and very rarely participate in violent killing of elephants or other species. It's not in their nature to do so. However, the thinking about elephants having PTSD came out of this strange phenomenon that elephants were raping and killing rhinoceroses. And what was ultimately concluded, and this seems to be widely accepted now, is that these elephants were orphaned by culls. They watched their families get destroyed, and they ended up severely traumatized, severely emotionally dysregulated, and so they go into these rages and they start killing and raping these other animals.
Looks like a reenactment.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So there's emotional dysregulation and also possibly a temporal displacement here. And then, I mean, it's pretty awful. Baby elephants are stolen from their mothers, tortured, beaten, chained, starved, and stabbed with all kinds of objects in order to tame them. Rescued baby elephants from culls are often severely traumatized. Instances of elephants killing or injuring their abusive keepers has become so common in the 21st century that both the LA and San Diego zoos now employ practices of separating the keepers from the elephants at all times. So if you go and you look at the elephants, I've recently been to both zoos, you look at the keepers working with the elephants, there's always metal bars in between. And incidentally, in Cambodia, there will be no barriers between the elephants. I'm just going to be in that, so say a prayer for me.
You better bring some.
Okay, so I'd like to end on a little bit more of a positive note. There is a lot of work, recognition that this is happening, healing trauma. Okay, so this wonderful orphanage in Africa takes in these babies. The keepers, every elephant gets assigned a keeper. The keeper sleeps with the elephant. The idea is to reestablish a safe, healthy attachment, and then once that attachment is established, the elephant then starts to become re-socialized with other elephants. It's eventually returned to the wild, and the sweetest thing about this is that many of the elephants who are returned to the wild will come back and bring their babies to meet their human grandparents. Another way that elephant trauma is healed is in elephant sanctuaries, like the one I'm going to in Cambodia. There's one in Tennessee, where these are more captive elephants. They're elephants that are coming out of zoos. And what's so beautiful about this is what they try to do in these sanctuaries is to give the elephants back their agency. They can go wherever they want, they can do whatever they want. Humans do not tell them who they are or how to live. And the language that they use is really trying to help the elephant reconsolidate a sense of self. And a large part of that is through connection with other elephants, rebuilding healthy community, and also building healthy relationships with humans. Okay, so I want to just make a quick proposal. Ethical elephant brain scans. 1 minute, perfect. Okay, so that is a CAT scan of an elephant brain. Unfortunately, some of this data came from elephants that were killed in order to obtain their brain. These elephants were scheduled to be culled supposedly in Zimbabwe, but Zimbabwe is a mess when it comes to elephant ethics. I do not believe there is such a thing as an ethical elephant cull. Could we put an elephant in an fMRI? They are doing it with dogs. In a way that really, and they're doing it in a way that respects the dog's consent as much as they can. They treat it like a child, and yeah. We would have to build an enormous one, and I don't know if the technology would actually work. I don't know enough about fMRIs. But I'll close on this. I think an elephant EEG is a worthwhile way to pursue further research on the elephant brains. They have done it with dolphins. Of course, the dolphin probably would have less capacity to remove the EEG than the elephant would with its trunk, but if you had a good rapport with the elephant, you could maybe get some fantastic data that way. It would be non-invasive and it would respect the elephant's rights. Thank you.